So just so we're on the same page, the person I'm talking about in this mini documentary is not a good person. I do not support any of the actions, ideals, or reasons for what took place during this time. And I sure as hell do not take the time out of my day to research this because of any support towards this person or the movement. That being said, this is a purely analytical documentary going into the facts, strategy, and history behind this era and said person. One often untold story of World War II is that of the Desert Fox. In the annals of World War II, few military leaders have gained the near mythical status of Erwin Rommel, the German field marshal revered and feared for his lightning-fast tank offensives in the desert expanses of North Africa. Nicknamed the Desert Fox by both admirers and adversaries, Rommel's cunning, combined with an uncanny ability to exploit shifting sands, limited resources, and the psychological edge of surprise. Operating under the scorching sun, Rommel orchestrated campaigns that threatened British control of Egypt, the Suez Canal, and beyond. Yet behind the legend lies a labyrinth of operational secrets. How did Rommel sustain his offensive might despite persistent supply woes? What tactics allowed him to secure a string of surprising victories, even when outnumbered? And how did the Allies eventually unravel the Desert Fox's strategies, turning early German triumphs into later defeats? This script delves into Rommel's North African campaign, revealing the larger strategic picture that drew Germany to the deserts of Libya and Egypt, detailing Rommel's daring approach, and unpacking the critical turning points that led to his downfall. As we follow Rommel from his arrival in Libya in 1941 to his final retreat after the pivotal battles of 1942, we'll discover the true secrets of the Desert Fox's Desert War. World War II's North African theater wasn't merely a sideshow. For Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, securing North Africa promised access to the Suez Canal, vital shipping routes, and potentially the oil fields of the Middle East. Meanwhile, Britain clung to its Egyptian base to protect imperial connections to India and Southeast Asia. At first, Italy took the lead, with Mussolini launching an invasion of British-held Egypt in September 1940 from the Italian colony of Libya. But the Italian troops quickly stalled under British counterattacks, leading Adolf Hitler to intervene. Early in 1941, he dispatched the newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps, DAK, under the command of General Erwin Rommel. Hitler's instructions were initially limited: prop up the Italians, prevent total collapse, and divert British strength away from other fronts. However, once in Libya, Rommel perceived an opportunity to seize the initiative. Despite comparatively modest forces and logistical hurdles, he launched probing attacks that soon developed into a full-blown counteroffensive. German presence in North Africa thus expanded well beyond the original goal of a holding operation. Hence, North Africa became the stage for a prolonged desert war. Rommel's ability to exploit the environment and outmaneuver the British Eighth Army turned the region into a hotspot that absorbed increasing Allied attention and resources. Understanding these wider strategic stakes illuminates why Rommel's desert campaign grew into a pivotal chapter of World War II. Rommel's method in North Africa centered on aggressive, mobile warfare. Having earned accolades in the 1940 Blitzkrieg against France, Rommel favored rapid armored thrusts, often outpacing slower logistical elements. In the open desert, vast, flat, and lightly defended in many sectors, this approach carried distinct advantages. Surprise attacks. Rommel regularly launched offensives without waiting for perfect supply stockpiles. By gambling on speed, he aimed to keep the enemy off balance, capturing arms depots and fuel dumps in the process. Flexibility. The DAK's panzer divisions combined tanks, motorized infantry, and artillery in tight coordination. Rommel often led from the front, shifting forces as needed to exploit weak points. His willingness to deviate from detailed plans and pivot rapidly became a hallmark of Desert Fox strategy. Exploiting intelligence. Rommel capitalized on faulty Allied assumptions, poor security, or intelligence gleaned from intercepted signals, though ironically, the Allies would soon have their own intelligence coups. He strove to guess the British lines of retreat and cut them off, frequently forcing Allied forces into hurried withdrawals. This emphasis on swift, bold maneuver contrasted with the more methodical approach typical of many Axis generals. It imbued German-Italian forces with a sense of initiative that often overpowered larger but more cautious Allied contingents, at least in the campaign's earlier stages. Despite Rommel's brilliance in armored tactics, he faced a chronic issue: logistics. North Africa's unforgiving environment meant that every kilometer advance consumed precious fuel, water, and spare parts. Meanwhile, the Allies harassed Axis supply convoys crossing the Mediterranean, targeting Italian shipping. For Rommel, victory hinged on outrunning not just the enemy, but also his own supply limitations. Limited ports, Axis cargo typically arrived via Tripoli, Benghazi, or Tobruk. Each port had limited capacity, and overland transport across hundreds of miles of desert required huge convoys. Desert conditions. Vehicles broke down more frequently under intense heat and sand infiltration. Fuel usage soared during swift offensives, and capturing enemy stockpiles became essential for sustaining momentum. Italian dependencies. Much of Rommel's equipment and logistics were tied to the Italian command structure. Coordination with Italian generals like Graziani or Bastico wasn't always seamless. Rommel's demands for more resources often clashed with high-level Axis priorities elsewhere. Though Rommel employed cunning solutions, using captured Allied trucks, improvising fuel caches in forward areas, these supply issues dogged him. The deeper he penetrated into Egypt, the longer his supply line stretched, amplifying vulnerability. In the end, no matter how artful his tactics, prolonged operations required robust logistics, an area where the Desert Fox battled a persistent disadvantage. Shortly after arrival, Rommel launched a surprise offensive, pushing British forces back across Cyrenaica, eastern Libya. Within weeks, he captured Benghazi and encircled a key garrison at Tobruk. Though Tobruk resisted a direct assault, Rommel's swift success gained him the admiration of Hitler, who elevated him to full general. The British, reeling from losses in Greece and Crete, struggled to reinforce the desert front. In mid-1941, the British attempted Operation Battle Axe to relieve Tobruk, but Rommel's lines held. A second offensive, Operation Crusader, November 1941, eventually forced Rommel to withdraw from eastern Cyrenaica, temporarily lifting the siege of Tobruk. Despite retreating to El Aquila, Rommel soon gathered fresh reinforcements, Panzer Mark III and IV upgrades, and supplies. By early 1942, he struck again, retaking Benghazi and capturing thousands of Allied prisoners. The decisive stroke came at the Battle of Gazala, west of Tobruk. Rommel outflanked the Allies in a daring maneuver known as the Gazala Gallop, trapping Allied units and forcing a chaotic withdrawal. Soon after, Tobruk itself fell to the DAK in a lightning assault. This victory was Rommel's zenith in North Africa. He advanced confidently into Egypt, driving toward El Alamein, a mere 100 kilometers from Alexandria. With each success, Rommel's reputation soared among Axis circles. To many in Britain, he became a near-mythical foe whose unpredictability demanded round-the-clock vigilance. Yet, these triumphant months also stretched his thin supply lines to the limit, setting the stage for one of the most significant turnarounds of the Desert War. While Rommel's operational secrecy initially surprised Allied commanders, British codebreakers at Bletchley Park steadily improved their reading of German and Italian signals, particularly via ultra-intercepts. They gleaned insights into Axis supply shipments, enabling the Royal Navy to sink many convoys. Moreover, they tracked Rommel's intended movements, aiding Allied generals like Claude Auchinleck and later Bernard Montgomery in positioning for counterattacks. Seeking to push the Allies out of Egypt fully, Rommel arrived at El Alamein, a narrow corridor between the Mediterranean coast and the Qattara Depression. The British Eighth Army braced themselves at this natural choke point. Exhausted and undersupplied, Rommel couldn't break the Allied defensive line. The First Battle of El Alamein stalled his momentum, revealing the harsh reality of overextended supply lines and determined British resistance. General Bernard Montgomery took command of the Eighth Army in August 1942, implementing reorganization, boosted morale, and stockpiling large reserves of tanks, artillery, and ammunition. Armed with ultra-intelligence and thorough preparations, Montgomery launched a major offensive in late October, the Second Battle of El Alamein. Despite Rommel's skilled maneuvers, the Allied materiel and manpower advantage proved decisive. After a grueling 2-week clash, Axis lines broke, forcing Rommel into a long retreat westward. Simultaneously, in November 1942, the Allies landed in French North Africa, Operation Torch, threatening Rommel from the west. Facing a two-front pressure in Tunisia, Rommel's days in the desert were numbered. He engaged in defensive battles to delay the inevitable, but by early 1943, Axis forces surrendered in North Africa, culminating in a strategic Allied victory. Rommel led from the front, frequently rushing among tank columns in his personal vehicle dubbed the Mammoth. This emboldened his troops, but also created friction with higher command. He believed in capitalizing on fleeting opportunities, rather than rigidly adhering to orders from superiors in Berlin or Rome. Subordinates often admired his energy, but some fellow generals found him unpredictable. Nazi propaganda elevated Rommel as a heroic figure, presenting him as the ideal soldier loyal to Hitler, though their relationship was at times strained. The British press, too, inadvertently boosted his legend by highlighting his cunning, fueling the Desert Fox moniker. Despite this aura, Rommel was no unstoppable genius. Logistical shortfalls, Allied code-breaking, and strategic miscalculations ultimately curtailed his conquests. Much like Napoleon, Rommel excelled at operational maneuvers, local tactics, and morale building, but he sometimes struggled with grand strategy or the deeper logistical complexities of a long war. The Desert Theater required close coordination with the Italian High Command, the Luftwaffe, and the Kriegsmarine's convoys, a juggling act beyond any single field commander's direct control. Rommel's persistent requests for more supplies and support often went unanswered or arrived too late, exposing cracks in Axis cooperation. After El Alamein and Operation Torch, Rommel withdrew across Libya into Tunisia, where he hoped to make a final stand. Nonetheless, overwhelming Allied reinforcements from the US and British armies poured in. By early 1943, the Desert Fox had little room to maneuver. His attempts to counterattack at Kasserine Pass inflicted initial Allied setbacks, but were short-lived. Allied air superiority and armor production far outclassed the Axis. Rommel, suffering health issues and disillusioned with the deteriorating Axis situation, eventually left North Africa before the final surrender in May 1943. The once glorious Africa Corps disbanded, and 250,000 Axis troops fell captive. From that point, Rommel's path diverged. He took positions on the Atlantic Wall in France, but never again did he recapture the dynamism of those desert battles. For Allied forces, North Africa proved a stepping stone to the invasion of Sicily and the eventual liberation of Italy. Thus concluded one of World War II's most storied campaigns, marking the end of Germany's presence in Africa and the end of Rommel's dream of delivering a decisive blow to British power in the Middle East. Across a tumultuous 2-year span in North Africa, Erwin Rommel demonstrated a flair for surprise offensives, superbly integrated armored tactics, and the capacity to transform a meager Axis presence into a genuine threat to Allied holdings in the Middle East. His Desert Fox moniker wasn't mere hyperbole. Through aggressive maneuvers and bold risk-taking, Rommel unhinged British lines repeatedly, at times nearly seizing Egypt itself. However, the relentless pressures of supply shortages, Allied code-breaking, and the arrival of overwhelming reinforcements steadily wore down his forces. El Alamein became the pivot that ended his winning streak, showing how even a master tactician can be undone when strategic depth, logistics, and intelligence favor the adversary. Still, Rommel's North African campaign left an indelible imprint on military lore. It underscores that cunning and daring can achieve dramatic gains, but that a truly decisive victory also requires robust supply chains, consistent resources, and broader strategic alignment. In that sense, Rommel's battlefield brilliance and ultimate defeat in the desert remain a sobering lesson in the interplay of skill, chance, and strategic realities.